The morning sun cast long shadows across the small cemetery on the hill, its golden light doing nothing to warm the October air that bit through worn fabric. Mary Ellen Hartwell stood beside the fresh mound of earth, her small hands clutched around a threadbare cloth doll, the only thing she had left from before her mother died 5 winters past. The preacher's words had faded into the wind an hour ago, and most of the townsfolk had already made their way back down the dusty path to Willow Creek, 9 years old and slight for her age. Mary Ellen kept her eyes fixed on the rough wooden cross that marked her father's grave. Thomas Hartwell, 1823 to 1878. The letters had been carved hasty-like by old Mr. Morrison from the general store, who'd muttered about payment the whole time he worked. Her father would have done it proper, with smooth edges and maybe even a line from Scripture. But her father was gone now, taken by the fever that had swept through the valley like wildfire. "Stop your dawdling, girl." The sharp voice cut through her grief like a rusty blade. Constance Hartwell. No, Constance Blackwood. She'd been quick to remind everyone after the burial, stood 20 paces away, her black bombazine dress rustling in the wind. She'd married Thomas Hartwell barely 2 years ago, arriving from St. Louis with trunks full of fancy clothes and a smile that never quite reached her pale blue eyes. Mary Ellen didn't move. Her legs felt rooted to the spot, as if the earth itself was trying to keep her close to where her father lay. She pressed the doll tighter against her chest, feeling the rough patches where she'd mended it with scraps from her father's old shirts. "I said move!" Constance's voice rose higher, carrying that edge that meant trouble. "The stage leaves in an hour, and I won't have you making me late." "Late for what, ma'am?" Mary Ellen's voice came out as barely a whisper. She'd learned early that speaking soft sometimes kept Constance's hand from swinging. "For taking you where you belong." Constance's thin lips curved into something that might have been a smile on another face. "The Sisters of Charity run a fine establishment for unfortunate children in Denver. They'll take you in, teach you to work. Lord knows you're useless for anything else." The words hit Mary Ellen like physical blows. "But Papa said, he said this was home. He promised—" "Your Papa's dead." Constance stepped closer, her boots crunching on the dry grass. "And his promises died with him. This ranch, this house, everything belongs to me now. And I won't have you hanging around my neck like a millstone." Mary Ellen felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not in front of her. Papa had taught her to be strong, even when things got hard. But this was harder than anything she'd known. "My things are already packed." Constance gestured toward the cemetery gate where a shabby carpet bag sat in the dirt. "Everything you need. Now come along, or I'll have Samuel drag you." Samuel Briggs, Constance's man from St. Louis, who'd appeared just days after Papa took sick, stood by the gate. He was a thick-set man with hands like ham hocks and eyes that reminded Mary Ellen of a snake she'd once seen sunning itself on a rock, cold and patient and ready to strike. Mary Ellen took one last look at her father's grave. The wooden cross seemed to blur as tears finally escaped down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered. "I tried to be good. I tried so hard." She turned and walked toward the gate, each step feeling like a betrayal. Behind her, she could hear Constance muttering about the cost of burial plots and how much she could get for the ranch if she sold it to that cattle company from Cheyenne. The carpet bag was pitifully light when Mary Ellen picked it up. Through a hole in the corner, she could see the edge of her church dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that her real mother had sewn. At least Constance had let her keep that. Samuel grabbed her arm as she passed, his fingers digging into her skin through the thin fabric of her everyday dress. "No trouble from you on the ride," he growled. "Mrs. Hartwell's been more than generous, arranging for your care." Mary Ellen didn't answer. She'd learned that Samuel liked it when people cowered, and she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she held her doll tighter with her free arm and kept her eyes forward as he hauled her toward the waiting wagon. The ride to town was silent except for the creaking of wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. Mary Ellen sat in the back, wedged between sacks of grain that Samuel was taking to market. Constance sat up front like a queen, her back straight and her hands folded properly in her lap. She hadn't looked back once since they'd left the cemetery. Willow Creek wasn't much of a town, just a main street with a dozen buildings clustered along it like teeth in an old man's mouth. The stage stop stood at the far end, a weather-beaten building with a corral out back where tired horses waited for their next run. A few people lingered on the wooden sidewalks, but they all seemed to look away when the wagon passed. Mary Ellen wondered if they knew what was happening, if they cared that Thomas Hartwell's daughter was being sent away like unwanted goods. The stage was already there when they arrived, a dusty Concord coach with Wells, Fargo and Company painted on the side in fading yellow letters. The driver, a grizzled man with tobacco stains in his gray beard, was checking the harnesses while his guard cleaned a rifle that had seen better days. "This the orphan?" the driver asked without looking up. "The unfortunate child. Yes," Constance corrected, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You have the fare?" Money changed hands. Mary Ellen saw the flash of bills and tried not to think about how that money came from selling her father's tools just yesterday. Constance hadn't wasted any time clearing out what she called unnecessary items. "She'll ride up top with the luggage," the driver said. "Got a full coach today." "That's fine." Constance turned to Mary Ellen with that cold smile. "Well then, I suppose this is goodbye." Mary Ellen wanted to say something, to beg, maybe, or to curse this woman who'd stolen her father and was now stealing her home, but the words stuck in her throat like dust. Instead, she just stood there, clutching her carpet bag and her doll, feeling smaller than she'd ever felt in her life. Nothing to say? Well, perhaps that's for the best. Constance smoothed her skirts and turned toward the wagon. "Samuel, we have business at the bank." They left without another word, without even waiting to see her safely onto the stage. Mary Ellen watched the wagon disappear around the corner of Murphy's Dry Goods, and something inside her chest seemed to break. She was alone now, truly alone, in a way she'd never been before. "Come on, girl," the driver said, not unkindly. "Let's get you settled. It's a long ride to Denver." He helped her climb up to the driver's box, where she'd ride exposed to the elements but at least able to see where she was going. Her carpet bag went with the other luggage, tied down with ropes that looked like they might snap at the first hard bump. As she settled onto the hard wooden seat, Mary Ellen caught sight of her reflection in the window of the stage office. A pale, thin face looked back at her, with dark hair that Constance had chopped short last month because it was too much trouble to keep neat. Her dress hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight since Papa got sick, unable to eat much with worry gnawing at her stomach. The driver climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Name's Walt," he said. "Been driving this route for 15 years. You ever been to Denver?" Mary Ellen shook her head. "Big city," Walt continued, spitting tobacco juice over the side. "Lots of buildings, lots of people. The sisters run a tight ship. From what I hear, you'll have food and a roof, at least." Food and a roof. Was that all she could hope for now? Mary Ellen thought of the ranch, of the room under the eaves where she'd slept all her life, of the kitchen where Papa would make flapjacks on Sunday mornings, singing old songs from when he was young. All of it gone now, swept away like dust in a storm. The guard climbed up on the other side, his rifle across his knees. "All aboard, that's coming aboard," he called out. The stage door slammed shut below them, and Walt released the brake. Get up there," he called to the horses, and they lurched into motion. As they rolled down Main Street, Mary Ellen twisted in her seat to look back. She could just see the hill where the cemetery lay, the wooden crosses like broken teeth against the sky. Somewhere up there, her father was sleeping his final sleep, and she was being carried away from him. Maybe forever. The town fell away behind them, replaced by the endless grassland that stretched in all directions. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy like a dream she couldn't quite remember. The stage wheels kicked up dust that made her cough, and the sun beat down without mercy, But Mary Ellen barely noticed. She was too busy trying to memorize everything. The smell of sage on the wind, the way the grass rippled like water, the cry of a hawk circling overhead. These might be the last familiar things she'd ever know. Walt glanced at her, and something in his weathered face softened. "It ain't right," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Tom Hartwell was a good man. Wouldn't have wanted this for his girl. But wanting didn't matter anymore. Mary Ellen realized. Her father's wants had been buried with him, and she was left with nothing but a cloth doll and a carpet bag with a hole in the corner. As the stage rolled on, carrying her toward a future she couldn't imagine, she pressed her face against the doll and finally let the tears come. They fell silent and steady, like rain on drought-hardened ground. And if Walt noticed, he had the kindness not to say anything about it. The sun climbed higher, and the miles stretched on. And Mary Ellen Hartwell rode toward her exile, 9 years old and already learning that the world could be colder than any October morning, and crueler than any stepmother's smile. The stage rolled on through the afternoon heat, wheels creaking a mournful rhythm that matched the ache in Mary Ellen's chest. Walt had fallen silent after his brief words of sympathy, concentrating on managing the team of 6 horses that pulled them across the vast Colorado territory. The guard, who'd introduced himself as Jake, dozed fitfully beside them, his rifle sliding dangerously close to the edge with each bump. Mary Ellen clutched her doll tighter as they passed through a landscape that grew increasingly foreign. The familiar hills around Willow Creek had given way to endless plains, broken only by the occasional cluster of cottonwoods marking a stream bed. The mountains she'd known all her life were behind them now, and ahead stretched nothing but grass and sky and the unknown. When they stopped to change horses at Fisher's Station, Walt helped her down from the driver's box. Her legs were stiff and her dress was covered in a fine layer of dust that made her sneeze. 15 minutes. Walt announced to the passengers who emerged from the coach below, a traveling salesman with a sample case, 2 women in traveling suits who whispered behind their hands, and a thin man in clerical clothes who kept checking a pocket watch. Mary Ellen stood uncertainly by the stage, not sure if she was allowed to move. The station was just a low-slung building of rough boards and adobe, with a corral out back where fresh horses stamped and whinnied. The smell of manure and sweat hung heavy in the air. "You hungry, girl?" Walt asked, pulling out a piece of jerky from his vest pocket. "It ain't much, but it'll keep your stomach from complaining." Mary Ellen took the offered food gratefully. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Constance had been too busy preparing for her departure to bother with breakfast. The jerky was tough and salty, but she chewed it slowly, making it last. "Where you from originally?" Jake asked, having woken up enough to take notice of her. "Before Willow Creek. I was born there," Mary Ellen said quietly. "My mama and papa came out from Ohio before I was born. Papa said they wanted to make a new start, where the land was free and the sky went on forever." "Ohio folk." Jake nodded knowingly. "Good farming people, usually. Your PA have a good spread?" 300 acres along Willow Creek," Mary Ellen said, pride creeping into her voice despite her grief. "Papa raised cattle and grew corn. He built our house himself, with help from the neighbors. Said it was the finest house in the county, even if it wasn't the biggest." The 2 women from the coach had wandered close enough to overhear. "Poor little thing," one of them murmured to her companion. "Orphaned so young." "My father's dead," Mary Ellen said, lifting her chin. "But I'm not an orphan. I have had a stepmother." The women exchanged knowing looks that made Mary Ellen's cheeks burn. She turned away, pretending to be interested in watching the hostlers change the teams. When they climbed back aboard, the sun was already tilting toward the western horizon. Walt pushed the fresh horses harder, trying to make up time. They'd reach Bent's Fork by nightfall if they kept this pace, he said, where they'd stop for the night before continuing to Denver in the morning. The landscape began to change as afternoon wore into evening. The grass grew shorter and sparser, and the soil took on a reddish hue that reminded Mary Ellen of dried blood. Mesas rose in the distance like ancient fortresses, their flat tops catching the last of the sun while their sides fell into shadow. "Papa told me stories about this land," Mary Ellen said suddenly, surprising herself by speaking. "About the Indians who lived here before the settlers came, and the Spanish explorers who named the mountains. He said every rock and river had a story if you knew how to listen." Walt glanced at her. "Your PA sounds like he was a thinking man. Not many settlers bother learning about what came before." "He loved to read," Mary Ellen said, warming to the topic. "Had a whole shelf of books, poetry and history, and even some novels. Though Constance said—" She stopped abruptly, not wanting to think about what Constance had said about her father's books being a waste of money and space. "Well, learning's never a bad thing," Walt said diplomatically. "Even for a girl, especially for a girl. Maybe in these times." They passed a burned-out homestead just as the sun touched the horizon. Nothing left but blackened timbers and a stone chimney pointing at the sky like an accusing finger. Mary Ellen stared at it until it disappeared behind them, wondering what had happened to the family who'd lived there. Fire, Indians, or had they just given up and walked away, leaving their dreams to crumble into dust? "That's the garrison place," Jake said, following her gaze. "A lightning strike last summer. They made it out alive, at least headed back east. Last I heard, some folks ain't cut out for this life." Mary Ellen thought about her father, how he'd loved the challenge of building something from nothing. He'd been cut out for this life. She was sure of it. It was Constance who didn't belong, with her city ways and her cold heart. If only Papa had seen that before he married her. But that was wishful thinking. And Papa had always said wishing wouldn't put food on the table or bring rain in a drought. You deal with what is, not what you wish was. He'd say. Mary Ellen tried to follow that advice now, but it was hard when what is meant being sent away from everything she'd ever known. Bent's Fork appeared just as the last light faded from the sky. It was bigger than Fisher's Station, almost a proper town, with a main street lined with businesses and a hotel that advertised clean beds and hot meals. The stage pulled up in front of the depot, and Walt set the brake with obvious relief. "All out for the night," he called. "Stage leaves at dawn, so don't be late." The paying passengers headed for the hotel, but Walt caught Mary Ellen's arm as she started to follow. "Not you, girl. Ticket only covers passage, not accommodations. You'll sleep in the depot." The depot was a single room with benches along the walls and a pot-bellied stove in the corner that gave off more smoke than heat. The station master, a sour-faced man with yellowed teeth, looked her up and down with obvious distaste. "No trouble from you," he warned. "I catch you stealing anything, and you'll be walking to Denver." "I don't steal," Mary Ellen said, stung by the accusation. "That's what they all say." He pointed to a bench in the corner. "You can sleep there. Privy's out back, but don't go wandering. There's rough men in this town who'd as soon sell a young girl to the Indians as look at her." Mary Ellen settled on the hard bench, using her carpetbag as a pillow. The doll went under her chin, a small comfort in the strange, cold room. Through the dirty window, she could see lights from the saloons down the street and hear the tinny sound of a piano playing a waltz she remembered from better days. Her stomach growled, reminding her that the piece of jerky had been hours ago. But she didn't dare ask for food, not after the station master's warning. Instead, she closed her eyes and tried to imagine she was back in a room at home, with Papa downstairs smoking his pipe and reading by lamplight. "You promised it would always be home," she whispered into the darkness. "You promised you'd always take care of me." But promises, she was learning, were fragile things. They could die with the person who made them, leaving nothing behind but empty words and a child alone on a hard bench in a strange town. Counting the hours until dawn would carry her even further from everything she'd loved. Sleep came fitfully, broken by the comings and goings of rough men who used the depot as a shortcut to the back alleys. Each time the door banged open, Mary Ellen startled awake, heart pounding, certain that someone had come to steal her away, but no one paid attention to the small figure huddled in the corner, and eventually, exhaustion won over fear. She dreamed of her father, standing in a field of grain that stretched golden to the horizon. He was calling her name, but when she tried to run to him, her feet wouldn't move. The distance between them grew wider and wider until he was just a speck against the sky, and then nothing at all. When Walt shook her shoulder at dawn, Mary Ellen's cheeks were wet with tears she didn't remember crying. "Time to go, girl," he said, not unkindly. "Got a long day ahead." She gathered her few belongings and followed him out into the cold morning air. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful if her heart hadn't been so heavy. As the stage rolled out of Bent's Fork, Mary Ellen looked back one last time. Somewhere behind them, beyond the miles of grass and dust, her father lay in the ground, and the only home she'd ever known stood empty. Ahead waited Denver and the Sisters of Charity, and a future as gray and uncertain as the prairie dawn. She pressed her face against the doll and tried to remember her father's voice, the way he'd sung while he worked, the stories he'd told by the fire. But already the memories seemed to be fading, like writing in dust that the wind was slowly erasing. "I'll remember," she promised herself fiercely. "I'll remember everything." But even as she made the vow, she wondered if it was just another promise destined to be broken, another set of words that would crumble to nothing in the face of time and distance and loss. The morning sun climbed higher as the stage rolled across the endless prairie, but Mary Ellen barely noticed its warmth. They'd been traveling for 3 hours since leaving Bent's Fork, and her body ached from the constant jolting of the wooden seat. Walt had been quiet most of the morning, concentrating on the team, while Jake scanned the horizon with the watchful eye of a man who'd seen too much trouble on these roads. It was Jake who spotted the rider first. "Company coming," he said, shifting his rifle to a ready position. "Single horseman, riding hard from the north." Walt squinted into the distance, then relaxed slightly. "Looks like he's aiming to intercept us, not ambush us. Still, keep that rifle handy." Mary Ellen turned to look, shading her eyes against the glare. A lone figure on horseback was indeed approaching at an angle, dust billowing behind him like smoke. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A tall man on a bay horse, riding with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. "Hold up there," the rider called out when he was within hailing distance. Walt pulled back on the reins, bringing the stage to a creaking halt. "State your business, stranger," he called back, his hand moving to the shotgun beside him. The rider slowed as he approached, raising one hand in a peaceful gesture. Now that he was closer, Mary Ellen could see his face, weathered by sun and wind, with deep lines around gray eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. His clothes were those of a working rancher, worn leather chaps, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. She guessed him to be about her father's age, maybe 40 winters or so. "Name's John McCord," the man said, reining his horse alongside the stage. His voice was deep and steady, like distant thunder. "I'm looking for the morning stage from Willow Creek. Would this be it?" "Might be," Walt said cautiously. "Depends on why you're asking." The stranger, McCord, reached into his vest pocket, moving slowly so as not to alarm Jake, whose rifle was still pointed in his general direction. He pulled out a piece of paper and unfolded it. "I'm looking for a child, a girl, about 9 years old, Mary Ellen Hartwell." Mary Ellen's heart stopped. How did this man know her name? Fear and hope warred in her chest as she pressed back against the seat, trying to make herself invisible. Walt's eyes narrowed. "And what business would you have with a child, mister?" McCord's gaze swept over the top of the stage, landing on Mary Ellen. His expression softened, and something that might have been relief crossed his features. "There you are," he said quietly, then louder. "To Walt. I knew her father. Tom Hartwell was my friend." "Tom's dead," Walt said bluntly. "Buried yesterday. The girl's headed to Denver, to the orphanage." "No," McCord said, and there was steel in that single word. "She's not." Jake's rifle came up higher. "Now see here, mister." "Easy," McCord said, keeping his hands visible. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Just the opposite." He held up the paper. "This is a letter from Tom Hartwell, written 2 weeks ago when the fever took hold. He knew he might not make it, and he made provisions." "What kind of provisions?" Walt asked, though his grip on the shotgun had loosened slightly. "The kind that says his daughter doesn't go to any orphanage." McCord's eyes found Mary Ellen again. "Tom asked me to take her in if anything happened to him. To raise her as my own." Mary Ellen found her voice. "I don't know you." McCord nodded. "That's true. Your PA and I didn't see each other much these last few years. But we go back a long way. Came west together in '58 before you were born. He helped me build my place, and I helped him build his. When your mama was sick, I was the one who rode for the doctor." His voice gentled. "You were just a tiny thing then. Probably don't remember." A memory stirred. A tall man holding her while her mother lay pale and still in the bed, singing a lullaby in a voice like rumbling thunder. Could it have been? "My stepmother arranged for me to go to Denver," Mary Ellen said carefully. "She paid for the ticket." McCord's expression hardened. "Constance Hartwell has no say in this matter. The paper I'm holding is a legal document, witnessed and notarized. Tom named me your guardian if anything happened to him." "Let me see that," Walt demanded. McCord handed over the paper without hesitation. Walt read it slowly, his lips moving with the words. Jake peered over his shoulder, squinting at the formal language. "Looks real enough," Jake admitted grudgingly. "Got Tom's signature and everything." "Because it is real," McCord said patiently. "Tom gave it to me 2 weeks ago. When he first took sick, he knew Constance wouldn't do right by the girl." "How do we know you're who you say you are?" Walt asked. "Could be you forged this whole thing." McCord considered this, then looked directly at Mary Ellen. "Your PA had a scar on his left hand, shaped like a crescent moon. Got it when a saw slipped while we were building his barn. You were about 3, and you cried because you thought the blood meant he was dying." Mary Ellen's breath caught. She remembered that day, the sharp smell of sawdust, her father's reassuring laugh even as he wrapped his bleeding hand, the way he'd picked her up with his good arm and danced her around until she stopped crying. "He used to call me his little songbird," she whispered, "because I was always humming." McCord smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "That's right. Drove your mama to distraction sometimes. But Tom loved it. Said it made the house feel full of life." Walt lowered the shotgun completely. "Well, You really did know Tom." "Like a brother," McCord confirmed. He looked at Mary Ellen again. "I know this is sudden. I know you don't remember me well. But your PA trusted me to take care of you, and I mean to honor that trust. You don't have to go to any orphanage. You have a home waiting for you, if you'll have it." Mary Ellen's mind whirled. This morning she'd been resigned to her fate, to a cold institution where she'd be just another mouth to feed. Now this stranger, no, this friend of her father's, was offering her something else. But could she trust him? "Where?" she asked. "Where is this home?" "About 40 miles west of here. Good land along the Blue River. I run cattle, mostly. But there's a garden and chickens and a milk cow. Got a solid house with plenty of room." He paused. "It's not fancy, but it's warm and there's always food on the table." "Do you have a wife? Children?" McCord's expression flickered with old pain. "Had a wife once. Lost her to childbirth fever 8 years back, along with the baby. Been just me since then." He straightened in his saddle. "But my sister Emma lives close by with her family. She's been after me to find some help around the place. She'd be pleased as punch to have a young one around again." Walt scratched his beard thoughtfully. "What do you think, girl? The man seems to be telling the truth, and that paper looks legal enough. Of course, you could still go on to Denver if that's what you want." Mary Ellen looked at the paper in Walt's hands, at the stranger on the bay horse who claimed to have known her father like a brother, at the road ahead that led to an orphanage where she'd be nobody special. Her father had trusted this man enough to make him her guardian. Shouldn't she trust her father's judgment, even now? "He really asked you to take care of me?" she asked McCord. "With his own hand and his dying breath," McCord said solemnly. "Said you were the most precious thing in his world, and he couldn't bear the thought of you being sent away. He wanted you to stay on the land, to grow up under the big sky like he and your mama planned." Tears pricked Mary Ellen's eyes. That sounded like her father. All right, even dying. He'd been thinking of her, planning for her, trying to keep his promises the only way he could. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," McCord said simply. "Come home with me. Let me keep the promise I made to your PA. Walt cleared his throat. "Well, if you're taking the girl, there's the matter of the fare. It's been paid through to Denver." McCord reached into his saddlebags and pulled out a leather pouch. "I'll cover it, whatever it takes." He looked at Mary Ellen. "That is, if the young lady is willing." Mary Ellen clutched her doll tighter, feeling as if she stood on the edge of a cliff. One path led to the known, an orphanage, hard work, loneliness, but at least certainty. The other led to the unknown, a strange man's ranch, a new life, possibly danger, but also possibly home. "Papa trusted you," she said finally, her voice small but determined. "So I'll trust you too." Relief washed over McCord's face. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret it." He swung down from his horse with easy grace and reached up to help her down from the stage. "Let's get your things." Jake handed down her carpet bag, and Mary Ellen noticed how carefully McCord took it, as if it contained treasures instead of a few worn dresses and mended stockings. "You take care of Tom's girl," Walt said gruffly. "He was a good man, the best." McCord agreed. "And I'll guard his daughter with my life." As McCord lifted her onto his horse, settling her in front of him on the saddle, Mary Ellen caught Walt wiping at his eyes with his sleeve. "Dust," he muttered when Jake looked at him questioningly. "Plenty of that on these roads." Jake agreed, though his own eyes looked suspiciously bright. McCord touched the brim of his hat to the two men. "Obliged to you both for keeping her safe this far." "Just see you keep her safer," Walt replied. "Tom Hartwell's girl deserves better than what she's had these last days." As they turned away from the stage, Mary Ellen looked back one last time. The road to Denver stretched out behind them, disappearing into the heat haze. Whatever life had waited for her there would remain a mystery now. Instead, she faced forward, toward the mountains, and the unknown future that lay beyond them. "We'll stop in Milford for supplies," McCord said as they rode. "Get you a proper meal and maybe some peppermint sticks if the store has them, then home by nightfall. How does that sound?" "Good," Mary Ellen said, and found she meant it. For the first time since her father died, she felt something other than despair. It might have been hope, fragile as a new shoot in spring, but real nonetheless. As they rode away from the stage road, the stranger who'd known her father began to hum. It was a tune she recognized, one her father used to sing while he worked. And suddenly, Mary Ellen didn't feel quite so alone anymore. The bay horse picked its way along a trail that wound through scattered pine and juniper, leaving the stage road far behind. Mary Ellen sat stiffly at first, unused to sharing a saddle with a stranger, but as the morning wore on, she found herself relaxing against John McCord's steady presence. He rode with the unconscious ease of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it, one arm loosely around her to keep her secure while the other held the reins. "Your PA ever tell you how we met?" McCord asked after they'd ridden in comfortable silence for a while. Mary Ellen shook her head. "He didn't talk much about the old days, just that he came from Ohio." "That he did." "So did I. Matter of fact, different towns, but the same dream. To head west and make something of ourselves." McCord's voice took on the rhythm of remembrance. "Met him in Independence, Missouri, spring of '58. Both of us had signed on with the same wagon train. Young fools with big plans and not enough sense to know how hard it would be." A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the clear air. Mary Ellen watched it soar, remembering how her father used to say that hawks could see tomorrow from up there. "What happened?" she prompted when McCord fell silent. "Oh, what always happens on the trail. Broken axles, sick oxen, river crossings that nearly drowned us all. Indians, too, though mostly they just wanted to trade. Your PA, though, he had a way about him. Cool head in a crisis. When my wagon tongue snapped in the middle of nowhere, he's the one who figured out how to fix it with nothing but rawhide and prayer." McCord chuckled. "Course, he made me promise to help him with his place when we got where we were going. Fair trade, as it turned out." They created a rise, and the land opened up before them, rolling hills covered in grama grass, with darker patches marking creek beds lined with cottonwoods. In the distance, the mountains rose like a promise, their peaks still touched with snow despite the autumn season. "There," McCord said, pointing to a cluster of buildings in the valley below. "That's Milford. We'll stop there for supplies and that meal I promised you." Milford proved to be larger than Willow Creek, but smaller than Bent's Fork, a proper town with a main street, a church with a white steeple, and businesses that looked like they'd been there long enough to grow roots. McCord guided the horse to a hitching rail in front of a general store with "Daniels and Son, Dry Goods and Supplies," painted on a sign that creaked in the breeze. "Let's get you fed first," he said, lifting her down from the saddle. "Mrs. Baker runs a dining room next door that serves the best pot roast this side of the divide." Mary Ellen's stomach growled at the mention of food, reminding her that she'd had nothing but that piece of jerky since yesterday. She followed McCord into a clean, simple room with checkered tablecloths and the heavenly smell of cooking meat. Mrs. Baker turned out to be a plump woman with graying hair and kind eyes that took in Mary Ellen's dusty dress and worn shoes in one swift glance. "John McCord," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Haven't seen you in town for a month or more. Been busy with the fall roundup," McCord replied, removing his hat. "Mrs. Baker, this is Mary Ellen Hartwell. She'll be living at my place now. Mary Ellen, this is Mrs. Baker, who makes the finest pies in 3 counties. Mrs. Baker's eyebrows rose slightly at the introduction, but she smiled warmly at Mary Ellen. "Hartwell, any relation to Tom Hartwell over in Willow Creek?" "My father," Mary Ellen said quietly. "Was," McCord corrected gently. "Tom passed this week, the fever." "Oh, you poor dear." Mrs. Baker's face creased with genuine sympathy. "And your mother?" "Gone these 5 years." McCord answered when Mary Ellen stayed silent. "Tom asked me to take her in. We go way back." Mrs. Baker nodded as if this explained everything. "Well then, you'll be needing a good meal. Sit yourselves down and I'll bring you the special. And maybe some of that apple pie you mentioned." The food, when it came, was everything the aroma had promised. Tender beef with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread with butter, green beans cooked with bacon. Mary Ellen ate steadily, trying not to appear too eager but unable to help herself. It was the first real meal she'd had since her father took sick. McCord ate more slowly, watching her with those steady gray eyes. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Mary Ellen paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. I don't remember. Constance said food was wasted on children. We ate what was left after she and Samuel were done." Something dark flickered across McCord's face. "Samuel?" "Her friend from St. Louis. He came to visit a lot after Papa got sick." Mary Ellen looked down at her plate. "Papa didn't like him, but he was too weak to send him away." McCord's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Well, at my place, everyone eats their fill. No child goes hungry under my roof." After the meal, they walked to the general store. Mr. Daniels, a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, greeted McCord like an old friend. "John, good to see you. What can I do for you today?" "Need to outfit my new ward here," McCord said, his hand resting lightly on Mary Ellen's shoulder. "She'll be living with me now, and she needs proper clothing for ranch life." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. McCord selected practical items, 2 sturdy dresses for everyday wear, A warm coat for winter, boots that actually fit, wool stockings, undergarments, and a bonnet to keep the sun off her face. When Mary Ellen protested that it was too much, he waved her concerns away. "Your PA would haunt me if I didn't see you properly clothed," he said. "Besides, Emma will have my hide if I bring you home in rags. My sister has strong opinions about how young ladies should be dressed." Mr. Daniels added everything up on his slate, and McCord paid without haggling. As they prepared to leave, he noticed Mary Ellen eyeing a display of hair ribbons near the counter. "Which color do you like?" he asked. "Oh, I don't need—" "Every girl needs something pretty," McCord said firmly. "Your PA told me your mama used to wear blue ribbons in her hair. Made her eyes shine," he said. Mary Ellen's throat tightened. "She did. I remember." McCord selected a length of sky blue ribbon and added it to their purchases. "There. Now, I believe I mentioned something about peppermint sticks." By the time they left Milford, the sun was past its zenith and starting its descent toward the mountains. Mary Ellen wore one of her new dresses, a practical brown calico that fit properly, and her new boots. The old clothes were bundled in paper and tied behind the saddle with the other purchases. The blue ribbon held her hair back from her face, and she'd tucked 2 peppermint sticks in her pocket for later. "Thank you," she said as they rode out of town. "For everything." "No need for thanks. It's what your PA wanted." McCord was quiet for a moment. "I need to tell you something about why your PA wrote that letter, about why he didn't trust Constance to do right by you." Mary Ellen tensed. "What do you mean?" "He came to see me 2 weeks ago, when the fever first took hold. Rode all the way to my place, sick as he was, because he needed to make sure you'd be protected." McCord's voice was carefully controlled. "He'd discovered some things. About Constance, about her plans." "What kind of plans?" "The kind that involved selling the ranch to a cattle company from Cheyenne. Papers were already drawn up. All she needed was for your PA to be gone and you out of the way." McCord's arm tightened slightly around her. "There was money involved, a lot of it, and Samuel Briggs, he had a stake in the deal too." Mary Ellen felt cold despite the warm afternoon sun. "Papa knew?" "He suspected. That's why he came to me. Why he wrote everything down legal-like. He wanted to make sure you'd have a home, no matter what happened." McCord paused. "There's more. The ranch. Your PA left it to you, not Constance. She only has use of it until you come of age. Then it's yours, free and clear." "But," she said, she lied. The words were flat, matter of fact. "Your PA may have married her, but he never changed his will. You're his only heir. Mary Ellen, that ranch, that land, it's your birthright." Mary Ellen's mind spun with this new information. All those times Constance had called her a burden, a charity case, worthless, and all along, she'd been trying to steal what rightfully belonged to Mary Ellen. "Can we get it back?" she asked. "Maybe, probably, but not today." McCord's voice gentled. "Today. We get you home and settled. Tomorrow, we can start thinking about fighting for what's yours. Your PA made sure the papers were filed proper in Denver. Constance can't sell what isn't hers, no matter what she tells people." They rode on through country that grew increasingly beautiful as the afternoon wore on. The trail wound through stands of aspen whose leaves had turned gold with autumn, their white trunks standing like sentinels. A creek ran alongside the path for a while, its water clear and cold, singing over rocks worn smooth by time. "Almost home," McCord said as they topped another rise. "Just beyond those bluffs there." Mary Ellen leaned forward, eager for her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The land opened up into a valley with good grass and water, sheltered by hills on 3 sides but open to the south, and there, nestled against a grove of cottonwoods, stood a collection of buildings that spoke of permanence and care. The main house was built of logs, solid and well chinked, with a stone chimney that promised warmth in winter. A porch ran along the front, with the real glass windows on either side of the door. To one side stood a barn, newer looking than the house, with corrals extending from it. Other outbuildings scattered the property. A smokehouse, what looked like a bunkhouse, various sheds and shelters. But what caught Mary Ellen's eye was the garden. Even this late in the season, she could see rows of vegetables still growing, protected by the shelter of the valley. Sunflowers nodded along a fence, and she spotted what might be rose bushes near the porch. "It's beautiful," she breathed. McCord's voice held quiet pride. "It's home. You're home now, if you'll have it." As they rode down into the valley, Mary Ellen felt something ease in her chest. This wasn't the home she'd lost. Could never be that. But looking at the solid house, the well-tended land, the evidence of a life built with care and intention, she thought maybe, just maybe, it could be something new, something good. A dog came bounding out to meet them, tail wagging furiously. McCord laughed. "That's Buck. Useless as a guard dog, but good company on cold nights." "Papa wouldn't let me have a dog," Mary Ellen said, reaching down to pet Buck's head as he danced alongside the horse. "Said they were too much trouble." "Well, I reckon a place isn't a proper home without a dog or two." McCord reined in at the porch. "Welcome home, Mary Ellen. It isn't much, but it's yours for as long as you need it." "Forever?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop it. McCord dismounted and reached up to lift her down. His hands were gentle but sure, and when he set her on the ground, he crouched to meet her eyes. "Forever, if that's what you want," he said solemnly. "I made a promise to your PA, and I aim to keep it. This is your home now. Your family. Family." The word settled around her like a warm blanket. Not the family she'd been born to, not the family she'd lost, but family nonetheless. "Thank you, Mr. McCord," she whispered. "John," he corrected. "Or Uncle John, if you'd rather. But we're family now. So none of this Mr. McCord business." Mary Ellen nodded, not trusting her voice. She clutched her doll and looked up at the house that would be her new home, thinking of her father, of his foresight and love that reached beyond death to protect her. "Come on," John said, standing and taking her hand. "Let me show you your room. Then we'll see about some supper. Emma will be by tomorrow. I expect, once she hears you're here, she'll probably try to mother you to death. Fair warning." As they walked toward the house, Buck dancing around them in the late afternoon sun, painting everything golden. Mary Ellen felt the first real smile since her father's death tugging at her lips. It wasn't the life she'd planned, wasn't the future she'd imagined, but it was a future. And that was more than she'd had this morning. And somewhere, she thought, her father was smiling too. The journey from John McCord's ranch house to the wider expanses of his land began the next morning, after a breakfast of flapjacks and bacon that reminded Mary Ellen painfully of Sunday mornings with her father. John had been up before dawn, seeing to the stock, and by the time she'd dressed in one of her new calico dresses and ventured downstairs, he had coffee brewing and batter ready for the griddle. "Sleep well?" he asked, flipping a flapjack with practiced ease. "Yes, sir. I mean, Uncle John." The title still felt strange on her tongue, but his approving nod made it worthwhile. "Good. Thought we'd ride out today. Let you see the place properly. Can you ride?" Mary Ellen nodded. "Papa taught me. We had an old mare named Buttercup. She was gentle as could be." "Well, I've got just the horse for you. After breakfast, we'll see about getting you properly mounted." An hour later, they were saddling horses in the barn. John had chosen a small paint mare with a calm disposition and intelligent eyes. "This is Rosie," he said, running his hand along the mare's neck. "She's carried my sister's young ones plenty of times. She'll take good care of you." As Mary Ellen adjusted the stirrups with John's help, she noticed how different this barn was from the one at home. Larger, for one thing, with a hayloft full of sweet-smelling fodder and stalls for a dozen horses. Everything spoke of prosperity built slowly over years of hard work. They rode out as the morning mist was lifting from the valley, Buck trotting alongside with his tongue lolling out in canine joy. The ranch spread out before them, 5,000 acres, John told her, pieced together over 20 years of careful buying and trading. "Started with just a quarter section," he explained as they followed a trail along the creek. But land was cheaper then, and I had a knack for finding water. That's the secret out here, water. A man can make do with poor grass if he has to, but without water, he's got nothing. They paused at the top of a rise where the view opened up in all directions. To the west, the mountains rose in purple majesty. To the east, the prairie rolled on forever, golden in the morning light. North and south, John's land stretched as far as Mary Ellen could see, marked by natural boundaries of ridges and creeks. "Your PA helped me dig the first well," John said, pointing to a distant windmill. "Took us 2 weeks of backbreaking work, but when that water came up sweet and clear, we danced like fools." His smile held memory. "Your mama was there. This was before you were born. She said we looked like a pair of muddy scarecrows trying to waltz." Mary Ellen tried to picture it, her parents young and laughing. John McCord without the lines that grief and weather had carved into his face. All of them believing the future held nothing but promise. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. "Mama. Papa didn't talk about her much. I think it hurt too much." John was quiet for a moment, then clicked his tongue to set his horse moving again. Mary Ellen followed on Rosie, waiting. "Sarah was light," he said finally. "That's the best way I can describe her. She lit up any room she walked into, had a laugh that could chase away the darkest mood. Your PA was half wild when he met her, full of big dreams but no notion how to achieve them. She settled him, gave him purpose. They rode down into a meadow where late wildflowers still bloomed, Indian paintbrush and prairie asters making splashes of color against the dry grass. A jackrabbit burst from cover, causing Rosie to sidestep, but Mary Ellen kept her seat easily. "Good hands," John approved. "Your mama was a fine rider too, better than your PA, though he'd never admit it." He chuckled. "She used to race him from the house to the creek. Let him win just often enough to keep him from getting discouraged." They spent the morning covering the near portions of the ranch. John showed her where the cattle gathered in winter, sheltered from the worst of the storms. He pointed out the different grasses, explaining which were good for grazing and which the cattle would only eat if desperate. They checked on a small herd of horses in a side pasture, including several foals that made Mary Ellen's heart squeeze with their knobby-kneed beauty. As the sun climbed toward noon, they turned back toward the house. That's when they saw the dust cloud on the main road, a buggy approaching at a good clip. "That'll be Emma," John said, and Mary Ellen heard both affection and resignation in his voice. "Brace yourself, child. My sister means well, but she can be a mite overwhelming." The buggy pulled into the yard just as they reached the barn. The woman who climbed down was younger than Mary Ellen had expected, perhaps 35, with John's gray eyes but a rounder, softer face. Her dress was practical but well made, and her brown hair was pinned up under a neat bonnet. Behind her, 3 children tumbled out of the buggy like puppies freed from a pen. "John McCord," Emma's voice carried across the yard. "You take in a child and don't think to send word. I had to hear it from Mrs. Baker in town." "Only happened yesterday. John said mildly, dismounting and helping Mary Ellen down. "Figured you'd find out soon enough." Emma's scolding expression softened as she looked at Mary Ellen. "Oh, you poor dear. You must be Tom's daughter. I'm so sorry about your father." Before Mary Ellen could respond, she found herself enveloped in a hug that smelled of lavender and fresh bread. It was so unexpected, so maternal, that tears pricked her eyes. "There now," Emma said, pulling back to study her. "Pretty as a picture, aren't you? Just like your mama. I met her once at a church social. She had the loveliest smile." "Emma, let the child breathe," John said, but he was smiling. The 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, had crept closer, staring at Mary Ellen with open curiosity. "These are my terrors," Emma said fondly. "Robert, James, and little Margaret. Children. This is Miss Mary Ellen. She'll be living with Uncle John now." "Are you an orphan?" The younger boy, James, asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. "James," Emma scolded, but Mary Ellen shook her head. It's all right. Yes, I suppose I am. But Uncle John has given me a home. Can you ride? Robert, the older boy, asked. Uncle John's teaching us, but Maggie's still scared. I am not, Margaret protested, then looked at Mary Ellen shyly. Only sometimes, when the horses are very tall. The ice broken. The children peppered her with questions as Emma hustled everyone inside. Soon the kitchen was full of noise and activity. Emma had brought fresh supplies, including, to John's apparent dismay, new curtains for the parlor. This place needs a woman's touch, she declared, holding up the cheerful yellow calico. I swear, John, sometimes I think you'd be happy living in a cave. Nothing wrong with my house, John protested, but he winked at Mary Ellen. Though I suppose curtains wouldn't hurt. As Emma bustled about, preparing what she called a proper meal, she drew Mary Ellen into helping. Can you peel potatoes? Dear, of course you can. Every girl knows how to peel potatoes. Tell me, what did that stepmother of yours feed you? Mrs. Baker said you looked half-starved. Mary Ellen found herself telling Emma about the last months with Constance, the words coming easier than she'd expected. Emma made sympathetic noises and disapproving ones in all the right places, her hands never stopping their efficient movement. Well, you'll eat properly here, Emma declared. John's a fair cook for a bachelor, but I'll make sure you know how to prepare good, hearty meals. A woman needs to know how to feed her family. By the time dinner was ready, Mary Ellen felt as though she'd been absorbed into Emma's family without quite knowing how it happened. The children had shown her their favorite spots around the ranch, including a barn cat with new kittens that made Margaret squeal with delight. Robert had solemnly informed her that Uncle John was the best shot in 3 counties, while James wanted to know if she could climb trees. The meal was chaos compared to the silent, tense dinners with Constance. Everyone talked at once, reaching across the table, laughing at James's attempt to balance a spoon on his nose. John presided over it all with quiet amusement, occasionally redirecting the worst of the children's exuberance, but mostly letting the cheerful disorder wash over him. I haven't seen you this relaxed in years, Emma told him as she served apple pie. Having a child in the house agrees with you. The house was too quiet, John admitted, glancing at Mary Ellen. Didn't realize how much until now. After dinner, while Emma and Mary Ellen cleaned up, the men and boys went to see to evening chores. Emma kept up a steady stream of conversation, but her questions were gentle, circling around the hard topics without pushing. You know, she said as they dried the last plate, I was only a little older than you when we lost our parents. John was 16, thought he had to take care of me all by himself. Stubborn as a mule, even then. She smiled at the memory. But we made it through. Family does that, finds a way to keep going, even when it seems impossible. He's not really my family, though, Mary Ellen said quietly. Emma's hand stilled on the dish towel. Oh, honey, family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them, who makes sure you're fed and safe and loved. By that measure, you've got more family than you know. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Emma gathered her brood for the ride home. I'll be back day after tomorrow, she announced. We'll start on those curtains, and I'll bring fabric for some proper dresses. Can't have you wearing calico for church. Emma, she has perfectly good dresses. John protested. Men, Emma said to Mary Ellen in a conspiratorial tone. They think perfectly good means not actually falling apart. We'll show them what proper means. The children called goodbye from the buggy, already planning what they'd show Mary Ellen next time. As the dust settled behind them, John and Mary Ellen stood on the porch in companionable silence. That wasn't too much, was it? John asked. Emma can be wonderful. Mary Ellen finished. She's wonderful. John smiled. That she is. Bossy as all get out, but wonderful. He gestured at the fading sunset painting the mountains gold and crimson. This is my favorite time of day. Used to sit out here with your PA sometimes, not talking, just watching the light change. They sat on the porch steps, Buck settling beside them with a contented sigh. The evening was warm for October, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and the last roses of summer. "Uncle John," Mary Ellen said after a while, "that paper, the one that says the ranch is mine, is it safe?" "Safe as houses, filed proper in Denver, with copies at the bank here and with Judge Morrison in Colorado Springs. Constance can scheme all she wants, but she can't change what's legal." "Will she try to take me back?" John's jaw tightened. "Over my dead body. You're under my protection now, and that paper makes it legal. She comes near you, she'll have to go through me, Emma, and half the county." Tom Hartwell was respected here. People won't stand for his daughter being mistreated. Mary Ellen leaned against the porch post, watching the first stars appear. Somewhere out there was her old home, her father's grave, all the pieces of a life that had shattered. But here, in this moment, with the solid presence of John McCord beside her and the memory of Emma's warm kitchen still fresh, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon. Peace. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming for me, for all of this." "No thanks needed," John said. "Your PA saved my life once, pulled me out of a river in flood. I never got the chance to repay that debt. Maybe this is how I do it, by making sure his daughter has the life he'd have wanted for her." They sat in silence as the stars came out in earnest, the vast Wyoming sky putting on its nightly show, and for the first time since her father's death, Mary Ellen Hartwell felt like she might actually have a future worth looking toward. The kitchen of John McCord's ranch house had become Mary Ellen's favorite place in the 6 weeks since her arrival. This morning, like most mornings, she stood at the big wooden table kneading bread dough while sunlight streamed through Emma's yellow curtains. The smell of coffee filled the air, mixing with the yeasty scent of rising dough and the smoke from the bacon John was frying. "Easy on that dough," Emma called from where she was teaching Margaret to embroider. "You're making bread, not trying to wrestle it into submission." Mary Ellen eased her touch, smiling at the gentle correction. Emma came by 3 times a week now, always with her children in tow, filling the house with noise and laughter and the kind of maternal fussing Mary Ellen had almost forgotten existed. "Ma says you're learning real quick," Robert announced from his perch by the window, where he was supposed to be doing his arithmetic. "Says you'll be a better cook than her soon." "Robert James Sullivan," Emma scolded. "I said no such thing, though Mary Ellen is a natural in the kitchen," she added with a warm smile. The peace of the morning was broken by the sound of horses approaching. Many horses, moving fast. John set down the spatula and moved to the window, his hand instinctively going to where his gun belt would hang if he were wearing it. "Riders coming," he said, his voice carefully neutral. 6 of them. Mary Ellen felt her stomach tighten. In the weeks she'd been here, she'd learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. She wiped her floury hands on her apron and joined John at the window. The riders were already in the yard, their horses lathered from hard riding. The man in the lead was heavy-set, wearing a black coat despite the warming day, with a beard that couldn't quite hide his weak chin. Mary Ellen's heart sank as she recognized Samuel Briggs. "Stay inside," John said quietly. "Emma, keep the children back." But Mary Ellen caught his arm. "That's Samuel, Constance's friend. He's mean as a snake and twice as sneaky." John's expression hardened. "Then we know what kind of trouble this is." He strapped on his gun belt with practiced movements. "Emma, you and the children stay put. Mary Ellen, you're with me, but stay behind me and don't speak unless I tell you to." They stepped out onto the porch together, John moving with the easy confidence of a man on his own land. Buck, who'd been sleeping in a patch of sun, rose with a low growl. "That's far enough," John called when the riders were still 20 feet from the porch. "State your business." Samuel Briggs leaned forward in his saddle, his piggy eyes finding Mary Ellen despite John's protective stance. Well, there she is, the runaway." "No runaway here," John said evenly. "Just my ward, legal and proper." "That's what we've come to discuss." Briggs dismounted, his men following suit. "Seems there's been a misunderstanding, Mrs. Hartwell is deeply concerned about her stepdaughter, wants her home where she belongs. Constance gave up any claim to Mary Ellen when she tried to ship her off to an orphanage. John replied, "I have legal papers. Papers can be forged." Briggs interrupted. "Mrs. Hartwell never signed anything giving you custody. She's the child's legal guardian, and she wants her back." Mary Ellen couldn't stay silent. "She's not my guardian. Papa made Uncle John—" "Quiet, brat!" Briggs snapped, and John stepped forward, his hand moving to his gun. "You'll speak respectfully on my land, or you won't speak at all." The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. Briggs's men shifted nervously, hands hovering near their weapons. Through the window, Mary Ellen could see Emma herding the children away from the glass. Now, a new voice said, and one of the riders pushed forward. This man was different from the others, better dressed, with the soft look of someone who made his living with paper rather than rope. "Let's all remain civilized. I'm Marcus Thornberry, attorney at law. I represent Mrs. Hartwell's interests in this matter." "Then you're representing a lie," John said flatly. "Tom Hartwell made his wishes clear. I have documentation, which we'd like to see," Thornberry said smoothly. "You understand, Mr. McCord, we must ensure everything is proper for the child's sake." John's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Wait here," he turned to Mary Ellen. Inside, in the kitchen, Emma had the children huddled near the stove, her face pale but determined. John went to his office, a small room off the parlor, and returned with a leather portfolio. "Stay with Emma," he told Mary Ellen, but she shook her head. "This is about me. I should be there." Something in her voice must have convinced him, because he nodded. "Behind me, then. And if I tell you to run, you run." They returned to the porch to find Briggs's men had spread out slightly, trying to look casual but achieving only menace. Thornberry took the documents John offered, making a show of examining them carefully. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting. However," he produced his own papers. "We have here a more recent document, Mrs. Hartwell's assertion of her rights as the child's stepmother, filed just yesterday in Denver." "That's not possible," John said. "Tom's will specifically—" "But you see, there's some question about the validity of that will." Thornberry's smile was oily as old lamp fuel. "Mrs. Hartwell contests that her husband was not in his right mind when he made these arrangements. The fever, you understand, delirium. A man might say or sign anything." "That's a lie," Mary Ellen burst out. "Papa was clear-minded when he went to Uncle John. He knew exactly what he was doing." Briggs laughed, an ugly sound. "And who's going to believe a child, especially one who's been turned against her loving stepmother by a man who stands to gain control of valuable property?" John went very still, the kind of stillness that comes before violence. "Choose your next words carefully. Briggs." "Is that a threat?" Briggs stepped closer, confident with his men at his back. "Because it sounds like—" The kitchen door banged open, and Emma emerged carrying John's shotgun with the ease of a woman who'd grown up on the frontier. "Gentlemen," she said sweetly, "I believe you've overstayed your welcome." Robert and James appeared at the windows, John's rifles in their small hands, barrels resting on the sills. Even little Margaret was there, solemnly holding a cast-iron skillet. Thornberry paled. "Now see here, this is most irregular." "What's irregular?" a new voice called out. "Is 6 armed men threatening a child and her lawful guardian." Everyone turned to see 3 riders approaching from the east. Mary Ellen recognized Sheriff Walsh from town, his star glinting in the morning sun. With him were 2 deputies, all of them armed and alert. "Morning, John," the sheriff said easily, though his eyes never left Briggs and his men. "Emma sent young James out the back when she saw riders coming. Smart woman. Mind telling me what's going on here?" "Land grab disguised as family concern," John said succinctly. "These men claim to represent Constance Hartwell, but what they really want is Mary Ellen's inheritance." Sheriff Walsh dismounted, his deputies flanking him. "That's so? Well, Mr. Thornberry," the lawyer supplied nervously. Mr. Thornbury, you should know that any custody issues need to be settled in court, not at gunpoint on a man's own land. The sheriff's weathered face was stern. And you, Briggs, I know you by reputation. Nothing good ever follows where you go. We have legal documents, Thornbury began. Then present them to Judge Morrison in Colorado Springs. He's the one who validated Tom Hartwell's will in the first place. Sheriff Walsh stepped closer. But right now, you're going to get on your horses and ride out. And if I see any of you near this ranch or this child again without proper court orders, you'll be enjoying the hospitality of my jail. Briggs's face flushed dark red. You can't. I can, and I will. The sheriff's hand rested on his gun. John McCord's a respected man in this county. Tom Hartwell was too. You're neither. Now get. For a moment, the situation balanced on a knife's edge. Then Thornbury touched Briggs's arm. We'll pursue this through proper channels, he said stiffly. They mounted their horses with poor grace, Briggs shooting venomous looks at Mary Ellen that made her shrink closer to John. As they rode away, the sheriff called after them. And Briggs, I'll be writing to the marshal in Denver about this. He might be interested in your sudden concern for a child whose father just happened to die with you in the house. Briggs jerked his horse around so hard it nearly reared, but Thornbury grabbed his reins. They rode away in a cloud of dust and muttered curses. Sheriff Walsh waited until they were out of sight before relaxing. Emma, you can put that scattergun down now, though I admit you made a pretty picture with it. Emma lowered the shotgun with visible relief. Thank you for coming. Tom, always happy to help. The sheriff turned to Mary Ellen. Don't you worry. Young lady, your daddy was a friend of mine. We'll make sure his wishes are respected. After the sheriff and his men left, promising to keep an eye on things, the household slowly returned to normal. The bread had overproofed and had to be punched down again. The bacon had burned, and everyone's nerves were strung tight as fence wire. They'll be back, John said quietly as he helped clean up the breakfast mess. This isn't over. Then we'll be ready, Emma said firmly. That child isn't going anywhere. Mary Ellen stood at the window, looking out at the yard where Briggs had sat his horse like a vulture waiting for something to die. Her hands were shaking, and she clutched them together to make them stop. Hey, John's voice was gentle. He crouched beside her, bringing himself to her eye level. You're safe here. I promise you that. Your PA trusted me to keep you safe, and I will. But what if they come at night? What if they bring more men? What if... Then they'll find out what kind of neighbors you have here, Emma said firmly. Tom Walsh will spread the word. By nightfall, half the county will know what happened here today. Good people don't stand for children being threatened. As if to prove her point, riders began arriving throughout the day. The Hendersons from the neighboring ranch, offering to post men on the borders. Old Mr. Garrett, who rarely left his place, bringing his 3 grown sons, the minister and his wife, carrying a cake and reassurances that the church stood behind them. By evening, Mary Ellen understood something she hadn't before. John McCord wasn't just giving her shelter. He'd given her a community. These people who'd known her father, who'd respected him, were ready to stand up for his daughter. At supper, with Emma's family staying the night and armed men patrolling the boundaries, Mary Ellen felt safer than she had since before her father fell ill. The house was full of voices and warmth, children giggling despite the serious circumstances, adults making plans with quiet determination. Thank you, she whispered to John as he tucked a quilt around her on the sofa, the bedrooms being full of guests. No need for thanks, he said, echoing his usual response. But this time he added, family protects family. Mary Ellen, that's what your PA would do if I had a child who needed help. That's what we do for each other out here. As she drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the sounds of people who'd chosen to stand with her, Mary Ellen thought about families, the one she'd lost, the one she'd fled from, and this new one, built not from blood but from choice and honor and the simple determination to do right by a neighbor's child. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Constance and Briggs wouldn't give up easily, not with money at stake. But tonight, She was safe, she was loved, and she was home. For now, that was enough. Winter had settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a deceptive peace. 3 months had passed since Briggs and his men had ridden away, and while there'd been no direct confrontation, the threat lingered like smoke from a distant fire. Mary Ellen had grown during those months, not just in height but in confidence, learning the rhythms of ranch life and finding her place in the McCord household. This February morning dawned clear and bitter cold, ice crystals painting the windows with delicate patterns. Mary Ellen was helping Emma prepare breakfast when John burst through the door, his face grim. "Ryder's coming," he said tersely. "But it's not Briggs. It's Judge Morrison from Colorado Springs." Emma's hand stilled on the biscuit dough. The judge himself? In this weather? Must be important to bring him out in February. John checked his rifle, a habit now when strangers approached. "Mary Ellen, put on your best dress. If the judge is here, we need to show proper respect." 20 minutes later, they were assembled in the parlor, the fire crackling cheerfully in contrast to the tension in the room. Judge Morrison was a thin man with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. With him was his clerk and, surprisingly, Sheriff Walsh. "Mr. McCord, Miss Hartwell." The judge began formally. "I'm here on a matter of grave importance. It seems there have been developments regarding the Hartwell estate." Mary Ellen's stomach dropped. "Has Constance? Please let me finish." The judge pulled out a leather folder. 2 weeks ago, a man named Samuel Briggs was arrested in Denver for forgery and theft. During the investigation, certain documents came to light. He spread papers on the table, and Mary Ellen recognized her father's handwriting. But something was wrong. The ink was different colors, the writing slightly off in places. "These are the documents Constance Hartwell filed claiming your father changed his will while fevered. Our experts have determined they're forgeries. Rather clumsy ones, actually." The judge's thin lips twitched in what might have been satisfaction. "Mr. Briggs, seeking leniency, has been quite forthcoming about his activities. He confessed." John leaned forward. "To everything. The forged will, the plan to sell the ranch to the Cheyenne Cattle Company. Even—" The judge paused, glancing at Mary Ellen. "Even to hastening Thomas Hartwell's demise." The room went silent except for the pop of pine sap in the fireplace. Mary Ellen felt the blood drain from her face. He killed Papa?" "Not directly," Sheriff Walsh said gently. "But he admitted to preventing the doctor from coming when your PA took a turn for the worse. Said Constance promised him a quarter share of the sale price if he helped ensure your father didn't recover." Emma made a sound of disgust and pulled Mary Ellen close. The girl stood frozen, trying to process this horrible truth. Her father might have lived, if not for greed, if not for Constance and Briggs, he might still be alive. "Where is Constance?" John asked, his voice deadly quiet. "That's why we're here," Judge Morrison said. "She's disappeared. Left Willow Creek the night Briggs was arrested. We believe she may try to claim Mary Ellen, thinking the child is her only remaining asset. The ranch is now under legal protection, but Mary Ellen isn't safe while she's free." John finished. "Precisely. I'm here to offer the protection of the court, but I need to know everything. Miss Hartwell, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me about your stepmother. Everything you remember." For the next hour, Mary Ellen talked. She told them about Constance's coldness, her relationship with Briggs, the way she'd changed after Papa got sick. Small details emerged, overheard conversations, strange visitors, medicine bottles that appeared and disappeared. By the end, she was exhausted and Emma was white-faced with anger. "That woman's a murderer," Emma said flatly. "Plain and simple. Proving it will be difficult," the judge admitted. "But we have enough to ensure she never gains custody of Mary Ellen. Mr. McCord, I'm prepared to formalize your guardianship immediately. Make it ironclad." "Do it," John said without hesitation, as the judge's clerk prepared documents. Sheriff Walsh stood by the window, keeping watch. "There's more," he said quietly. Briggs mentioned accomplices. Men Constance might turn to. We need to be prepared for trouble. We've been prepared since October, John replied. The papers were signed and witnessed, making John McCord officially Mary Ellen's legal guardian. The judge sealed them with red wax and his official stamp. These copies go to Denver, the courthouse in Colorado Springs, and my personal safe. No one can challenge this. After the officials left, the house felt strangely empty. Mary Ellen sat by the fire, staring at the flames, trying to reconcile the truth about her father's death with the months of grief she'd carried. "It's not your fault," John said, reading her thoughts. "Nothing you could have done would have changed things. I should have known, should have seen. You were a child who just lost her father. Constance fooled everyone, even grown men who should have known better." He sat beside her, solid and comforting. "Your PA would be proud of how strong you've been." That night, Mary Ellen couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, watching snow begin to fall. When she heard it, horses, moving quiet through the darkness. "Uncle John," she called, but he was already up, already armed. "Emma, take the children to the root cellar," he ordered. "Mary Ellen, you too." "No." Mary Ellen surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "This is my fight too. They're after me." John started to argue, but Emma touched his arm. "She's Tom's daughter. John, stubborn as he was, give her the little pistol and let her stand." Minutes later, they were positioned. John at the front window, Emma at the back with the shotgun, the boys upstairs with the rifles. Mary Ellen crouched by the side window, the weight of the derringer John had given her heavy in her hands. The attack came suddenly. Windows shattered as bullets flew, and men rushed the house from all sides. But they'd underestimated their opponents. John was a crack shot, Emma fearless, and even the boys held steady. Mary Ellen fired when a man tried to climb through her window, the little gun jumping in her hands. The firefight seemed to last forever, but was probably only minutes. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. 3 men lay groaning in the yard. Others had fled, and the house, though battered, had held. "Everyone all right?" John called. A chorus of affirmatives came back, though James was crying from fear and Margaret clung to her mother. Mary Ellen realized she was shaking, the derringer still clutched in her hands. Dawn brought help. Neighbors had heard the shooting and came armed and ready. Sheriff Walsh arrived with a posse, rounding up the wounded attackers. And there, trying to slip away in the confusion, was Constance. She looked different, travel-worn, desperate, her fine clothes replaced by rough homespun. When she saw Mary Ellen, her face twisted with rage. "You little brat! This is all your fault! If you'd just gone to the orphanage like you were supposed to." "That's enough," Sheriff Walsh said, cuffing her. "Constance Hartwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted kidnapping, and assault." "She's lying!" Constance screamed as they dragged her away. "All of it! She's a lying little—" Her words cut off as they shoved her into the prison wagon. Mary Ellen stood on the porch, watching the woman who'd made her life miserable being taken away in chains. She waited to feel satisfaction, but all she felt was tired. "It's over," John said, his hand on her shoulder. "Is it?" Mary Ellen looked at the bullet holes in the walls, the blood on the snow. "Will it ever really be over?" "The legal parts. Yes, Constance will hang or spend her life in prison. The ranch is yours, free and clear. But the rest," he sighed, "that takes time to heal." In the days that followed, the community rallied again. Men came to repair the damage. Women brought food and comfort. The story spread. How a young girl had stood with her guardians against those who would steal her birthright. Mary Ellen became something of a local legend. Though she didn't feel legendary, she felt like a girl who'd lost her father and nearly lost everything else. A week after the attack, John found her in the barn, brushing Rosie and crying quietly. "Want to talk about it?" he asked. "I killed a man," she whispered. "When he came through the window, I shot him and he died." John was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about that?" "Horrible, but also—" She struggled for words. "Also like I'd do it again, to protect our home, our family. Does that make me bad? No, John said firmly. It makes you someone who protects what she loves. That man came to hurt you, to take you away, maybe to kill us all. You defended yourself and your family. There's no shame in that. Papa wouldn't have wanted me to kill anyone. Your papa would have wanted you alive and safe. Everything else comes second to that. John took the brush from her hands. Mary Ellen, you've been through more in these months than most folks see in a lifetime. You've been brave and strong and good. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, tell you different. That night at supper, with the house full of Emma's family and the walls patched but still showing scars, Mary Ellen looked around the table. These people had risked their lives for her. They'd stood against guns and greed because it was right, because she was family. I want to use the money, she announced suddenly. From the ranch. When I'm old enough to claim it, I want to use it to help other children who've lost their families. Build something good from all this bad. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweetheart, your mama would be so proud. And Papa, Mary Ellen asked John, would be bursting his buttons with pride. John assured her, that's thinking like a Hartwell, like someone who builds instead of tears down. As winter slowly gave way to spring, life returned to normal. Constance was tried and sentenced to life in prison. The ranch in Willow Creek was leased to good people who would care for it until Mary Ellen came of age. And in the McCord house, a girl who'd lost everything found that sometimes. From the greatest losses come the most unexpected gifts. She still missed her father, would always miss him. But she'd gained something too, a family forged in fire, a home defended with courage, and the knowledge that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. We're having another one of those sunsets, John called from the porch one evening. The kind your PA loved. Mary Ellen joined him, settling onto the steps in what had become their evening ritual. The sky blazed with color, orange and pink and purple painting the clouds in shades of glory. He'd have been happy, she said, knowing I was here, knowing I was safe. He knew, John said quietly. When he came to me that day, sick as he was, he said, John, I'm trusting you with my whole world. And he was right to trust. Look what we've built from that trust. Mary Ellen looked at the house that had become home, at the land that sustained them, at the man who'd kept his promise against all odds. Her father was gone, but his love lived on in the choices he'd made, the friendships he'd built, the daughter he'd refused to see abandoned. Thank you, she said, as she did every evening. No thanks needed, John replied, as he always did, then added what had become his own ritual. We're family. And they were. Forged by loss, tested by fire, bound by choice and love and the endless Wyoming sky. They were family, and that was enough. Spring had fully arrived in Wyoming, painting the valleys with wildflowers and filling the air with the sound of returning birds. Mary Ellen stood on the porch of the McCord Ranch, now truly her home, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. It had been 6 months since the attack, 6 months since Constance's arrest, and life had settled into a rhythm that felt both new and timeless. Today was special. Today, she would return to Willow Creek for the first time since that terrible October morning when she'd been cast out. Ready? John asked, stepping out beside her. He was dressed in his best clothes, the ones Emma insisted he save for important occasions. As ready as I'll ever be, Mary Ellen replied, smoothing down her new blue dress. Emma had made it specially for this day, with tiny embroidered flowers that reminded her of the dress her mother had sewn so long ago. The wagon was loaded with supplies for the families now tending her father's ranch, and Buck sat proudly beside the seat, as if he too understood the importance of this journey. Emma and her family would follow later for the ceremony they'd planned, a proper memorial for Thomas Hartwell. Now that justice had been served and his daughter could safely return, the road to Willow Creek seemed both longer and shorter than Mary Ellen remembered. Each familiar landmark brought memories flooding back. The creek where she'd caught tadpoles, The big oak where Papa had pushed her on a rope swing. The rise where you could first see the town spread out below. "You all right?" John asked as they paused at that overlook. "Yes," Mary Ellen said, and meant it. "It hurts, but it's a good hurt, like stretching a muscle that's been still too long." They drove first to the cemetery. Someone, the minister's wife, they learned later, had been tending Thomas Hartwell's grave. The wooden cross had been replaced with a proper stone marker, and spring flowers bloomed around it. Mary Ellen knelt in the grass, not caring about her new dress, and traced her father's name with gentle fingers. "I'm home. Papa?" she whispered. "Not to stay, but to visit, to remember, and to tell you that everything worked out. Uncle John kept his promise. I'm safe and loved and learning so much." She pulled out a small leather journal. "I've been writing down all your stories, so I won't forget them. So someday I can tell them to my children." John stood back, giving her privacy with her grief. When she finally rose, her eyes were wet but peaceful. She placed a small bouquet of wildflowers, picked that morning from the ranch, against the stone. "Thank you," she said simply, though whether to her father or to God or to the universe itself, she couldn't say. Their next stop was the old ranch. The Andersons, who were leasing it, welcomed them warmly. Mrs. Anderson had coffee ready and fresh donuts that filled the kitchen with sweet smells. But it was strange seeing other people's belongings in the familiar rooms, hearing different voices echoing off the walls. "We've been taking good care of the place," Mr. Anderson assured her. "Fixed the roof, painted the barn, even got that stubborn gate working proper. It'll be in fine shape when you're ready to claim it." Mary Ellen walked through the house slowly, John a comforting presence behind her. In her old room under the eaves, Mrs. Anderson had left things mostly unchanged. Her few remaining toys sat on the shelf, and the quilt her mother had made still covered the bed. "Would you like to take anything?" Mrs. Anderson asked kindly. Mary Ellen picked up a small wooden horse her father had carved and a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. "Just these, the rest can stay. This is someone else's home now, at least for a while." The ceremony that afternoon was simple but moving. Half the county seemed to have turned out, filling the cemetery and spilling onto the hillside. Reverend Philip spoke about Thomas Hartwell's integrity, his love for his daughter, and how his final acts had been to ensure her safety. "Evil tried to triumph," the Reverend said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Greed and cruelty conspired against an innocent child, but love proved stronger. Friendship proved stronger. Community proved stronger. People shared memories. Tom helping raise a barn. Tom sharing his last bit of seed corn during a bad year. Tom teaching the school children to whistle bird calls. Mary Ellen hadn't known half these stories, and each one was a gift. Another piece of her father to carry forward. When it came time for her to speak, Mary Ellen's voice was steady. "My papa used to say that land wasn't worth anything without good people to tend it and good neighbors to share it with. He was right. When I needed help most, you all stood up. Not because you had to, but because it was right. Papa would be so grateful, and so am I." Sheriff Walsh spoke last, officially declaring the investigation closed and justice served. Constance Hartwell would never threaten anyone again, and the ranch was secured in trust for Mary Ellen until her 18th birthday. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, people drifted to the church hall where the women had laid out a feast. It was there, amid the comfortable chaos of a community gathering, that the final surprise came. Judge Morrison approached with a wooden box. "Miss Hartwell, this was found hidden in the Denver property Constance fled to. We believe it belonged to your mother." With trembling hands, Mary Ellen opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with faded ribbon. Her mother's jewelry, not expensive, but precious, a daguerreotype of her mother as a young woman, and at the bottom, a leather-bound journal, Mama's diary. Mary Ellen breathed. She opened it randomly and read in her mother's careful script. "Thomas brought Mary Ellen flowers today. Dandelions she picked herself, clutched in her chubby fist. She's 2 years old and already showing her father's determined spirit. I pray she'll grow strong and kind, that she'll know how deeply she is loved, that she'll find her own family to cherish as I cherish mine. Mary Ellen closed the journal, unable to read more in public. But oh, what a gift. Her mother's thoughts, her hopes, her daily observations. Hours of reading that would bring her mother back to life in ways memory alone couldn't manage. The ride home to the McCord Ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Buck snoozed in the wagon bed, worn out from a day of being petted by every child in 3 counties. The box of treasures sat safe in Mary Ellen's lap. It was a good day, John said finally as they turned into their valley, the ranch buildings welcoming in the twilight. The best, Mary Ellen agreed. Papa would have loved seeing everyone together like that. He saw, John said with quiet certainty. Maybe not with eyes like ours, but he saw. That evening, after chores were done and supper cleared away, Mary Ellen sat by the fire and began to read her mother's journal aloud. John listened, occasionally adding his own memories of Sarah Hartwell. Emma and her family had stayed over, and they too gathered to hear these glimpses of the past. The entries painted a picture of a happy family, small worries about weather and crops. Joy in Mary Ellen's first words and steps. Love threading through every ordinary day. There were mentions of John, too, and Emma, showing how interconnected their lives had been even then. "Listen to this," Mary Ellen said, reading from an entry dated just months before her mother's death. "John McCord came by today with news from town. Mary Ellen just lights up when she sees him, reached right for his beard and giggled when he pretended to growl. Tom says I worry too much, but it comforts me knowing there are good people like John in the world. If anything happens to us, I know he'd watch over our little songbird." The room fell silent. Even from beyond death, Sarah Hartwell's trust had shaped their present. "She knew," Emma said softly. "Somehow, she knew." As the evening grew late and the children dozed off, Mary Ellen carefully returned the journal to its box. There would be time to read every entry, to savor every word. For now, it was enough to know they existed. "Uncle John," she said as he banked the fire for the night, "do you think Papa knew how things would turn out? That Constance would, that I'd end up here?" John considered carefully. "I think he knew Constance wasn't to be trusted. I think he hoped I'd be able to help if needed. But the specifics? No, I don't think even he could have imagined all that happened." "I'm glad it did," Mary Ellen said, then quickly added, "Not Papa dying, never that, but coming here, finding family, learning I'm stronger than I knew. Your Papa always said you had steel in your spine, just like your Mama. These months just proved him right." Mary Ellen stood at the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. There was still growing to do, still healing to complete. The ranch in Willow Creek waited for her to come of age. The plans for a school for orphaned children were taking shape in her mind. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in a house filled with love, surrounded by family both born and chosen, carrying her parents' memory forward into a future they'd helped secure even in death. "I'm home," she whispered to the stars, to her parents, to the God who'd led her through the valley of shadows to this place of peace. "I'm finally, truly home." She turned from the window to find John waiting, as he always did, to make sure she made it safely to bed. Emma was tucking blankets around her children, humming softly. Normal, precious things that had become her world. "Coming?" John asked. "Coming," she confirmed, taking one last look at the stars. Somewhere up there, she liked to think, her parents were watching. Finally at peace, knowing their daughter had found safe harbor, the lamp was turned down. The house settled into sleep, and Mary Ellen Hartwell, orphan, survivor, beloved daughter and niece, closed her eyes and dreamed of wildflowers blooming on graves and love that transcended death itself. She was home, and all was well. Thank you so much for joining me on Mary Ellen's journey from heartbreak to hope in the Wild West. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier tales that warm the heart and stir the soul. What did you think of Mary Ellen's courage and the way her community rallied around her? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one and love connecting with fellow lovers of Western stories.